Hi, I'm Miles Porter. If you're awake right now, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Sometimes the best way to fall asleep is to stop trying so hard and let someone else do the thinking for a while. That's what I'm here for. Tonight we're on a train. It's a night train, heading north out of Athens, through the Greek countryside, up toward Thessaloniki. The time is a little past 11. The platform was warm when we boarded, and there was a smell of diesel and old stone and something sweet, maybe jasmine, growing along the fence by the station. But we're moving now. The city lights are thinning out behind us. The cabin is small and comfortable. There's a reading lamp that casts a circle of amber light on the wall, and the seat has been folded down into something that's almost a bed. Not quite, but close enough. The wheels have found their rhythm already. Click-clack, click-clack. It's steady. It's the kind of sound that doesn't ask anything of you. And I've got a story tonight. Actually, I've got several. They're old stories, very old, and they come from the land we're passing through right now. Greek mythology. The gods, the heroes, the monsters, the strange and beautiful tales that people told each other in this part of the world for thousands of years. Nothing urgent, nothing you need to remember, just stories to listen to while the train does its thing. Greece is a good place for stories at night. The land here is dry and rocky and full of stars. People have been sitting outside under those stars, telling tales about them for at least 3,000 years, probably longer. The poet Hesiod, who lived around 700 BCE, wrote down some of the earliest versions we still have. He was a farmer in a small town called Askra, in a region called Boeotia. He said it was a miserable place, cold in winter, harsh in summer, never pleasant. But the stories he told from that miserable little town traveled across the entire world and never stopped. That's the thing about a good story. It doesn't matter where it starts, it matters where it goes. The myths weren't told in one place or by one person. They passed from village to village, from mother to child, from old sailor to young sailor, across the wine-dark sea that Homer kept describing. By the time anyone wrote them down, they'd already been reshaped 1,000 times. Every teller added something. Every generation smoothed a corner or sharpened an edge. The versions we have today are like stones that have been in a river for centuries. They've been polished by all that handling. And they contradict each other, constantly. In one version of a myth, the hero goes east. In another, he goes west. In one, the goddess is kind. In another, she's terrible. The ancient Greeks didn't mind this. They weren't interested in the single correct version. They were interested in the truth inside the story, which is a different thing from the facts of it. That's worth remembering as we go along tonight. I'll tell you the versions I like best, but there are always others. The train sways gently as we pass through the outskirts of the city. I can see apartment buildings with their lights still on, balconies with hanging laundry, a cat sitting on a wall watching us pass. Then the buildings thin out, and there's a stretch of open land, silver under the moon. The first Greek railway line was only about 9 kilometers long. It ran from Athens to the port of Piraeus, and it opened on February 24th, 1869. It took 12 years to build those 9 kilometers. Greece is not easy land for laying track. The mountains get in the way. The gorges get in the way. Everything is limestone and olive trees and stubbornness. But they built it. And tonight we're riding on a line that runs 506 kilometers from Athens all the way to Thessaloniki, along a route that passes close to some of the most storied places in the ancient world. We'll pass near Thebes, where Oedipus once ruled. We'll skirt the edges of Thessaly, the land of centaurs and witches in the old myths. And if you looked out the right window at the right time tomorrow morning, you could see Mount Olympus. But we won't be awake for that. At least, I hope not. Let's start at the beginning. And in Greek mythology, the beginning is not a garden, or a word, or a bang. The beginning is something much simpler and much stranger. The beginning is chaos. That's the Greek word for it, chaos. And it doesn't mean what we think it means today, all noise and confusion and mess. In Greek, chaos meant something more like a gap, an opening, a yawn in the fabric of everything. The poet Hesiod wrote in his Theogony, which means the birth of the gods, that before anything else existed, there was chaos, just that, a vast, empty, formless space. And then, out of that emptiness, came Gaia, the earth. She just appeared. Hesiod doesn't explain how or why. She was simply the first solid thing, the ground beneath everything that would come after. Gaia had a companion, or maybe a counterpart. His name was Uranus, and he was the sky. He stretched above her and around her, and together they had children, many children. And this is where the story starts to get, well, very Greek. Their first children were the 12 Titans. They were enormous beings, older than the gods we know, and their names sound like the names of planets and forces and faraway things. Cronus, Rhea, Hyperion, Thea, Oceanus, Tethys, Mnemosyne, who was the goddess of memory, Themis, who was the goddess of law. There were 12 of them in all, 6 brothers and 6 sisters. Oceanus was the great river that the Greeks believed encircled the entire world. Hyperion was the Titan of light, father of the sun, the moon, and the dawn. Mnemosyne was memory herself. Without her, nothing that happened could be remembered. And so, in a way, nothing could really happen at all. She would later have 9 daughters by Zeus, and those daughters were the Muses, the goddesses of art and poetry and song and dance. Every creative act in the history of the Greek world began with a prayer to one of Mnemosyne's children. Cronus was the youngest of the 12, and he was the boldest. His name is sometimes confused with Chronos, the Greek word for time, but scholars say they are different figures. Cronus was the Titan who ruled the world during what the poet Hesiod called the Golden Age, when humans lived without toil or sorrow. But that age didn't last. It never does. But Gaia and Uranus also had other children. The Cyclopes, who each had a single eye in the center of their foreheads, and the Hecatoncheires, who each had 100 hands and 50 heads, which is, I think we can agree, quite a lot. Uranus looked at the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires and decided he didn't like them. So he pushed them down into Tartarus, the deepest pit beneath the earth. Gaia was not happy about this. She went to her other children, the Titans, and asked them to help her. Only one volunteered. His name was Cronus, the youngest of the 12. Gaia gave him a sickle made of flint, or maybe adamant, a mythical metal harder than anything. And when Uranus next came to embrace the earth, Cronus struck. What happened next is not something I'll describe in detail, because this is a bedtime story. But the result was that Uranus was overthrown, and Cronus became the ruler of the world. The age of the Titans had begun. Outside the window, the landscape is darker now. We've left the last of the Athens suburbs. There's a low ridge of hills to the west, barely visible against the sky. The stars are coming out. In Greece, on clear nights, you can see more stars than you'd believe possible. The ancient Greeks mapped them into constellations and gave them stories. Orion the hunter, the bear, Ursa Major, the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, placed in the sky by Zeus to escape the hunter's pursuit. The train hums along. The wheels keep their time. Click, clack, click, clack. Now, Cronus was king, and he married his sister Rhea. This was normal for Titans. They didn't have a lot of options, and they had children together. But Cronus had a problem. He'd heard a prophecy, maybe from Gaia herself, maybe from the fading voice of Uranus, that one of his own children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father. Cronus decided to solve this problem in the most straightforward way he could think of. He swallowed each child as it was born. First came Hestia, the eldest. He swallowed her. Then Demeter, swallowed. Then Hera, swallowed. Then Hades, then Poseidon. All of them swallowed and trapped inside the body of their father. They didn't die because they were gods, and gods are not easy to kill. But they were imprisoned. When Rhea was expecting her 6th child, she'd had enough. She went to Gaia for help. Gaia told her to go to the island of Crete, to a cave on Mount Ida, and give birth there in secret. Rhea did. The child was a boy. She named him Zeus. Instead of giving the baby to Cronus, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to her husband. Cronus swallowed the stone without checking, which tells you something about Cronus, I think. Zeus grew up in that cave on Crete. Different stories say he was raised by different beings. Some say it was the goat Amalthea, whose horn would become the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. Some say it was a group of warriors called the Coretes, who banged their shields together to cover the sound of the baby crying so Cronus wouldn't hear. Some say it was nymphs. It doesn't matter which story you believe. The point is that Zeus grew up hidden and safe, and when he was old enough, he came back. The cave where Zeus was born, or one of the caves that claims the honor, is on the Lacythi Plateau in eastern Crete. It's called the Dictaeon Cave. Archaeologists have found votive offerings there dating back to the Middle Minoan period, around 2000 BCE. People were leaving gifts for the gods in that cave 4,000 years ago. Small bronze figurines, pottery, weapons. The cave is about 2,000 meters above sea level. In winter, ice forms on the stalactites inside. In summer, the entrance is thick with wildflowers. It's a real place, and people have been telling stories about it for a very, very long time. There are different versions of what happened next when Zeus returned from Crete. In one version, the goddess Metis gave Cronus a potion that made him vomit up all the children he'd swallowed, plus the stone. In another version, Zeus simply forced his father to disgorge them. Either way, out came Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. They were alive, they were angry, and they were ready for war. The war between the Olympian gods and the Titans lasted 10 years. The Greeks called it the Titanomachy. Zeus freed the Cyclopes from Tartarus, and in gratitude they forged weapons for the three brothers. For Zeus, a thunderbolt. For Poseidon, a trident that could shake the earth and shatter any object. For Hades, a helmet that made its wearer invisible. With these weapons, and with the help of the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, the Olympians finally defeated the Titans. Most of the Titans were cast into Tartarus, that deep pit beneath the earth. Atlas, one of the Titans who had fought especially hard against the gods, was given a different punishment. He was condemned to stand at the western edge of the world and hold the sky on his shoulders forever. And Zeus became king. He drew lots with his brothers to divide the world. Zeus took the sky. Poseidon took the sea. Hades took the underworld. The earth was shared among all of them, and Olympus, the great mountain, became their home. The Greeks imagined Olympus not as a rocky summit exposed to wind and cold, but as a sort of paradise above the weather. Homer described it as a place without snow, without rain, without wind, just clear, bright, endless calm. The gods feasted there on ambrosia and nectar. They argued, they loved, they schemed against each other. They were, in many ways, just like humans, only larger, more powerful, and unable to die. Ichor ran in their veins instead of blood. Their language was different from the language of mortals, though no one could say exactly how. And they did not age past a certain point. Zeus always looks like a vigorous man in his prime. Athena is always young and fierce. They are frozen at their peak forever. But they felt everything humans feel: jealousy, rage, love, grief, pride, fear. That's what makes the Greek gods so interesting, I think. They are not distant or perfect. They are close. They are flawed. They are recognizable. The stone that Cronus had swallowed, thinking it was Zeus, was placed at Delphi in central Greece. The Greeks called it the omphalos, the navel of the world. It stood in the temple of Apollo for centuries, a round stone about the size of a person's head, supposedly the very stone that saved the world. The train is climbing now, just slightly. You can feel it in the way the rhythm changes, the wheels working a little harder. We're heading into the foothills of central Greece. Somewhere out there in the dark, the landscape is rising. Rocky slopes and pine forests, and dry riverbeds that fill with rushing water in the spring. If your eyes are getting heavy, that's good. That's what's supposed to happen. You don't need to follow every word. The train knows where it's going. Let me tell you about Olympus. Mount Olympus is real. It's not just a myth. It stands in northern Greece, on the border between Thessaly and Macedonia, about 80 kilometers southwest of Thessaloniki. Our train will pass close to it, though we won't see it tonight. The highest peak is called Mythicus, which means nose in Greek. It rises to 2,917 meters. That's 9,570 feet. It's the tallest mountain in Greece, and one of the tallest in Europe, in terms of how dramatically it rises above the race surrounding land. The summit wasn't climbed until 1913. A Swiss photographer named Frédéric Boissonnet and his companion Daniel Bode-Bovy made the first recorded ascent, guided by a local goat hunter from the nearby town of Litokoro named Christos Kakalos. This was just a year after Greece liberated that part of the country from Ottoman rule. For centuries before that, the mountain had been territory that nobody controlled. Bandits lived in its forests, shepherds grazed their flocks on its lower slopes, and above them all, the clouds gathered around the peaks and refused to let anyone see what was up there. Homer, writing around 700 BCE, said that the peak of Olympus never had storms. He said it basked in cloudless, pure upper air, a kind of luminous calm above all weather. Later writers thought Homer might have been describing observations that locals had made for generations. If you look at Olympus from below, on many days, you can see the summit shining clearly above a belt of clouds. The clouds sit at about 2,000 meters. The peak rises above them into blue sky. It would have looked to the ancient Greeks like the gods had chosen to live above the rain and the fog, in a place of permanent light. The mountain has 52 peaks. One of them is called Stephani, which means crown, but its older name is Thronos Dios, the throne of Zeus. It rises to 2,902 meters and has the steepest, most dramatic face on the entire mountain. The last 200 meters are almost vertical. Climbers say it is the most challenging ascent on Olympus. In 1938, Olympus became Greece's first national park. It has about 1,700 species of plants. 23 of those species are found nowhere else on Earth, only on this one mountain. There's a plant called Jankia heldrichii, a small purple flower that is a relic from the Ice Age. It has been growing on the cliffs of Olympus since before human civilization existed. At the foot of the mountain, on its eastern side, there was once a sacred city called Dion, dedicated to Zeus and the 12 gods. Excavations that began in 1928 and continue today have uncovered temples, theaters, baths, and mosaics from the Macedonian, Hellenistic, and Roman periods. Alexander the Great made sacrifices at Dion before setting out to conquer the Persian Empire in 334 BCE. He wanted the gods' blessing. Whether he got it is a matter of perspective, but he did conquer everything from Egypt to the borders of India, so perhaps he did. The train has found a long, straight stretch of track. The rhythm is very even now. The cabin rocks gently from side to side, just a degree or two each way, like a cradle. Outside the window, there's a plain. Flat farmland stretching away under the stars. It could be wheat, or cotton, or tobacco. It's hard to tell at night. But the Greeks have been farming this land for thousands of years. Demeter, the goddess of grain, was one of the most important deities in the daily life of ordinary people. More important, in many ways, than Zeus. You can fear the sky, but you need the harvest. So, the gods. Let me tell you about them. Not all of them. There are too many for one night. But the main ones, the 12 Olympians, the family that ruled from that shining peak above the clouds. Zeus was the king. You know that already. He was the god of the sky, of thunder, of justice, and of fate. His weapon was the thunderbolt, forged by the Cyclopes. His sacred bird was the eagle. His sacred tree was the oak. He was not, by any standard, a faithful husband. The myths are full of his love affairs with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women, which caused endless trouble. But he was also the god who maintained order, who enforced oaths, and who punished liars. The ancient Greeks had a complicated relationship with their chief god. Hera was his wife, and also his sister. She was the goddess of marriage, of women, of childbirth. Her sacred animals were the cow, the lion, and the peacock, the oldest and most important. Temples in Greece were dedicated to her. She was powerful, proud, and unforgiving, especially toward Zeus's many lovers. But she was also the protector of married life, and women prayed to her more than to any other god. Poseidon ruled the sea. He was Zeus's brother, and he had a trident that could cause earthquakes and split rocks. Sailors prayed to him before every voyage. He was moody and unpredictable, like the sea itself. He also created the horse. According to one myth, the goddess Demeter asked him to make the most beautiful animal the world had ever seen. He tried several times, making various creatures that weren't quite right, before finally producing the horse. By then, the story goes, his passion for Demeter had cooled. But the horse remained. Hades ruled the underworld. He was not evil, not exactly. He was just distant and grim and very, very rich. The Greeks called him Pluto sometimes, which comes from the Greek word for wealth. All the minerals and precious metals in the ground belonged to him. People were afraid to say his name, so they used other titles instead. The Rich One, the Unseen, the Host of Many. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, of craft, and of war in its most strategic sense. She sprang fully formed and fully armored from the head of Zeus. Hephaestus, the god of the forge, had to split Zeus's skull open with a hammer to let her out. She was Zeus's favorite child. She invented the bridle, which allowed humans to tame horses. She invented the trumpet, the flute, the pot, the rake, the plow, the yoke, the ship, and the chariot. The city of Athens is named after her. She won it in a contest with Poseidon. He offered the Athenians a spring of salt water. She offered them the olive tree. They chose the olive. The olive tree that Athena supposedly planted on the Acropolis was said to still be growing there in the 5th century BCE. When the Persians burned Athens in 480 BCE, they burned the tree too. But the next day, a new shoot had grown from the stump, 18 inches tall. The Athenians took this as a sign that Athena had not abandoned them. They rebuilt their city. They built the Parthenon. The temple was completed in 438 BCE, and it stood on the highest point of the Acropolis, visible from anywhere in the city. Inside stood a statue of Athena, 12 meters tall, made of gold and ivory by the sculptor Phidias. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. The gold alone weighed about 1,140 kilograms. That's about 44 talents of gold. A talent was about 26 kilograms. The Athenians used it in part as a reserve treasury. If the city was ever in desperate need of money, they could strip the gold from the statue. They never did. Apollo was the god of music, poetry, light, healing, plague, and prophecy. His twin sister Artemis was the goddess of the hunt, of wild animals, and of the moon. Together they were born on the tiny island of Delos, because their mother Leto could find nowhere else on earth willing to let her give birth. Every other place was afraid of Hera's wrath. Hermes was the messenger of the gods. He wore winged sandals and a winged hat, and carried a staff called the caduceus. He was the fastest of all the gods. He was also the god of thieves, of commerce, of travelers, and of anyone who lived by their wits. He invented the lyre, which he made from a tortoise shell on the very first day of his life. He then gave it to Apollo as a peace offering after stealing Apollo's cattle. He was 1 day old when he did this. The Greeks admired cleverness almost as much as they admired strength. Ares was the god of war, but not the clever kind. He was the god of bloodlust and violence and the chaos of battle. Both his parents, Zeus and Hera, disliked him. Athena regularly defeated him. The Greeks didn't respect him the way they respected the other gods, but they feared him, which was perhaps the point. Aphrodite was the goddess of love, beauty, and desire. One story says she was born from the sea foam off the coast of Cyprus. Another says she was a daughter of Zeus. Either way, she was irresistible to gods and mortals alike, and her influence touched every love story, every heartbreak, and every complicated relationship in all of Greek mythology. Which means she was very busy. She had a magic girdle, a belt or sash, that made whoever wore it irresistible. She once lent it to Hera, who used it to distract Zeus at a critical moment during the Trojan War, so the Greeks could gain an advantage. Even among the gods, beauty was a weapon. Hephaestus was the god of fire, of metalworking, of sculpture, and of craft. He was Aphrodite's husband, and he was the only Olympian who was physically imperfect. He was lame, and he walked with difficulty. But his hands could make anything. He forged Zeus's thunderbolts, Achilles' armor, the chains that bound Prometheus, and the first woman, Pandora, from clay. His workshop was said to be beneath Mount Etna in Sicily, and when the volcano erupted, people said Hephaestus was working at his forge. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, of grain, of the fertile earth. She is central to one of the most important myths we'll get to later tonight, the story of Persephone. Without Demeter, nothing grew. Without her blessing, the fields were bare, and the people starved. She was quiet and steady and absolutely essential. And then there was Dionysus, the god of wine, of theater, of ecstasy, of letting go. He was the last god to join the Olympians. Some say that Hestia, the gentle goddess of the hearth, stepped down from her throne to make room for him. Dionysus was different from the other gods. He had mortal blood. His mother, Semele, was a human woman. He traveled the earth rather than sitting on Olympus. He taught humans to grow grapes and make wine. His festivals were wild and loud and free. The ancient Greek theater was born from his worship. Every great tragedy, every comedy, every drama was performed in his honor. Those are the gods, or some of them. There were hundreds more, minor gods, river gods, nymphs, spirits, daimons of every description. The Greek world was full of divine presences. There was a god in every spring, every grove, every crossroad. You were never alone. The Greeks didn't have a holy book or a fixed doctrine. Their religion was practice, not belief. You showed respect to the gods by making offerings, pouring libations, attending festivals, and telling their stories. The stories were the theology. A shepherd in the hills of Arcadia might tell the story of Pan, the goat-footed god of the wild, differently from the way a philosopher in Athens told it. Both versions were true. Both versions mattered. And here's a thing I find interesting. In Greek, the word for God is theos. The word for mortal is thanatos, which comes from the word for death, thanatos. The fundamental difference between gods and humans in the Greek mind was not power, it was death. Gods lived forever. Humans did not. Everything in Greek mythology flows from that one difference. The gods are envied because they cannot die. Humans are pitied because they can. And sometimes, the stories are about what happens when someone tries to cross that line. The train has slowed a little. We're passing through a town. I can see a station platform lit by a single yellow light. A bench, a clock, nobody waiting. The train doesn't stop. It rolls through at half speed, and then the town is behind us, and the dark fields open up again. We are still moving. The wheels are still turning. Everything is fine. Let me tell you now about one of the Titans who didn't fight against Zeus in the Great War. His name was Prometheus. It means forethought, the one who thinks ahead. And his story is about the most important gift anyone has ever given. Prometheus was clever. He had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy, advising the young gods when the other Titans refused to listen to his strategies. But after the war was won and the world was divided up, Prometheus turned his attention to humans. He felt sorry for them. Some stories say he created them himself, shaping them from river clay. Other stories say the gods made humans and then gave Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus the job of giving them abilities to survive. Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, went first. He gave speed to the cheetah, claws to the bear, thick fur to the wolf, venom to the snake, wings to the eagle. By the time he was done, he had used up all the gifts, and there was nothing left for humans. They stood there, naked and helpless, with no fangs, no fur, no armor, no wings. Prometheus looked at them and thought, "This won't do." There was a gathering at a place called Mycone, where the gods and humans were supposed to decide how to divide the sacrificial offerings. Prometheus saw an opportunity. He prepared 2 portions from a slaughtered ox. In one pile, he placed the good meat, but covered it with the ox's stomach, making it look unappealing. In the other pile, he arranged the bare bones, but he wrapped them in glistening white fat, making them look rich and delicious. Zeus chose the pile that looked best, the bones wrapped in fat. When he realized he'd been tricked, he was furious. In some versions of the story, scholars think Zeus knew all along and chose the bones deliberately to have a reason to punish Prometheus. Either way, the result was the same. Zeus took fire away from humans. Without fire, humans couldn't cook their food. They couldn't stay warm in winter. They couldn't forge metal tools. They sat in the dark. Prometheus did the only thing he could think of. He went to Olympus, or perhaps to the workshop of Hephaestus, and stole fire. He hid it inside the hollow stalk of a giant fennel plant called a narthex. The pithy interior of the fennel could hold a burning coal, while the green outer skin stayed cool enough to carry. He brought the fire back to Earth and gave it to humans. And it wasn't just fire. In Aeschylus's version of the story, written in his play Prometheus Bound around the 5th century BCE, Prometheus gave humanity much more. He taught them to build houses from bricks. He showed them how to work with wood. He gave them numbers and letters. He taught them how to yoke oxen and harness horses. He showed them how to build ships and spread sails. He invented medicine. He taught them to read the signs of the sky, the flight of birds, the meaning of dreams. He gave them everything that separates a civilization from a group of cold, frightened animals huddling in a cave. And he gave them one more thing, perhaps the most important. He said, in Aeschylus's version, that before his intervention, humans could foresee their own deaths. They knew when they were going to die. Prometheus took that knowledge away. In its place, he put blind hope, the ability to go on living without knowing the end. That might be the greatest gift of all. Hesiod wrote that Zeus didn't see it happen. The fire was already among the mortals before the king of the gods realized what Prometheus had done. And when he found out, his anger was something that shook the heavens. Zeus designed 2 punishments, one for humanity, one for Prometheus. For humanity, Zeus ordered Hephaestus to shape a woman from clay, Athena taught her weaving. Aphrodite gave her grace and longing. Hermes gave her a cunning mind and a deceitful nature. They called her Pandora, which means all gifts. Zeus sent Pandora to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, as a gift. Prometheus had warned his brother never to accept gifts from Zeus. But Epimetheus saw Pandora's beauty and forgot the warning. He married her. Pandora had been given a large jar, sometimes called a box in later retellings, though in the original Greek it was a pithos, a storage jar. She was told never to open it. But curiosity, that gift from the gods, won out. She opened the jar, and out flew every kind of suffering: disease, hunger, war, grief, hard labor, old age, pain. They spread across the earth like smoke. By the time Pandora slammed the lid shut, only one thing remained inside: hope. The Greeks called it elpis. Just that one small thing, trapped at the bottom of the jar, still there when everything else had escaped. I like to think about that. All the terrible things loose in the world, and hope still sitting in the jar, waiting. Scholars have debated for centuries what it means that hope stayed in the jar. Is it good that hope didn't escape because it's still available to us, contained and preserved? Or is it bad because hope is trapped and we can't reach it? The Greek word elpis can mean hope, but it can also mean expectation, anticipation, or even delusion. Hesiod didn't explain. Maybe he didn't need to. The image is powerful enough on its own. A world full of suffering, and somewhere, inside a sealed jar, the one thing that could make it bearable. Prometheus was worshipped in Athens. His festival was called the Promethea. There was a torch race held in his honor, runners carrying lit torches through the streets, passing the flame from hand to hand without letting it go out. The participants wore wreaths, and those wreaths symbolized the chains that had bound Prometheus to his rock. A celebration of suffering, a celebration of what suffering can give. For Prometheus himself, Zeus devised something worse. He had Hephaestus forge unbreakable chains made of adamant, that mythical metal. He had his servants, Kratos and Bia, whose names mean power and violence, drag Prometheus to a desolate cliff in the Caucasus Mountains. There, Hephaestus drove iron spikes through Prometheus's arms and pinned him to the rock. The playwright Aeschylus, writing around the 5th century BCE, described this scene in his tragedy Prometheus Bound. He wrote that Hephaestus wept as he did it. Even a god can pity another god. Then Zeus sent an eagle every single day to tear open Prometheus's belly and eat his liver. Because Prometheus was immortal, the liver grew back every night, and the eagle returned every morning. This punishment was designed to last forever. It didn't quite last forever. Eventually, the hero Heracles, as one of his labors, came upon Prometheus chained to the rock. He killed the eagle with an arrow and broke the chains. Some versions say Zeus allowed this because he needed Prometheus to reveal a secret prophecy. Others say it was an act of mercy. But the myths say that even after his release, Prometheus was required to wear a ring made from the iron of his chains and a chip of the rock he'd been bound to, as a reminder. Some people say this is why humans wear rings, as a memory of the one who suffered so we could have fire. The train rocks gently as we round a long, slow curve. The sound changes for a moment, something deeper, like we're crossing a bridge over a dry riverbed. Then it settles back to normal. Click-clack, click-clack. If you've already drifted off, that's fine. I'll keep going, just in case. Now, there's a story I want to tell you that the ancient Greeks considered one of the most important of all their myths. It's about a mother and a daughter. It's about loss and return. It's about why the seasons change. And it started in a meadow full of flowers. Persephone was the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. She was young and she was beautiful, and she spent her days wandering through fields, picking narcissus and hyacinth and violet with a group of nymphs. The Homeric hymn to Demeter, written sometime around the 7th century BCE, gives us the fullest version of what happened next. Hades, the lord of the underworld, had been watching Persephone. He wanted her for his wife, but he knew that Demeter would never agree to let her daughter go down into the dark. So Hades went to Zeus, his brother, and asked for help. Zeus gave his consent, or at least he didn't refuse. He stayed silent, which in the language of gods might be the same thing. One day, while Persephone was gathering flowers in a meadow, the earth suddenly opened beneath her feet. Hades burst up from below in a golden chariot drawn by 4 black horses. He seized Persephone and pulled her down into the underworld. The earth closed over them. The nymphs saw nothing. They heard, perhaps, a scream. And then there was only the meadow, and the scattered flowers, and the silence. The Homeric hymn says that the flower Persephone reached for, the one that drew her away from her companions, was a narcissus. It was placed there deliberately, grown by Gaia at Zeus's request, as a lure. It had 100 blossoms on a single stem, and its fragrance was so sweet that the whole sky and earth and salt sea laughed. That's the word the poet used. The world laughed with the beauty of this flower, and a girl reached for it, and the ground opened up, and everything changed. Persephone's names are worth knowing. Her given name was Kore, which simply means maiden or girl. She became Persephone only after her descent. The name itself may be pre-Greek in origin. Scholars have found versions of it on Mycenaean tablets from around 1400 BCE, written in a script called Linear B. She was already ancient when the myths we know were written down. Demeter searched for her daughter. She searched for 9 days, carrying torches, eating nothing, drinking nothing. Nobody would tell her what had happened. The sun god Helios, who sees everything from his chariot in the sky, finally took pity on her and told her the truth. Hades had taken Persephone. Zeus had allowed it. Demeter was shattered, and then she was angry. She left Olympus. She disguised herself as an old woman, wrapping her golden hair in a dark veil, stooping her shoulders, making herself look like a grandmother past the age of bearing children. Nobody recognized her. A goddess walked among mortals, and not one of them knew. She looked twice at an old woman in a dark veil. She sat by roadsides and wept. The Homeric hymn tells us that she wouldn't sit in a chair when one was offered. She preferred a humble stool covered with a fleece. Even in her grief, there was a kind of dignity in her refusal of comfort. Eventually, she came to the city of Eleusis, about 18 kilometers northwest of Athens. She sat by a well called Kalichiron, the well of beautiful dances. The daughters of the local king, Celeus, found her there and brought her to the palace, where she was taken in as a nurse for the queen's infant son, Demephon. Demeter grew attached to the child. She decided to make him immortal by placing him in the fire each night, burning away his mortality the way a blacksmith tempers iron. Each night, the baby grew stronger and more beautiful. But one night, the queen, Metaneira, saw what was happening and screamed. Demeter was interrupted, and the spell was broken. Demephon would remain mortal. He would grow old. He would die, like every other human child. Demeter revealed her true identity. The hymn says the hall filled with light and fragrance. The old woman was gone, and in her place stood a tall, golden-haired goddess whose beauty was terrible. She commanded the people of Eleusis to build her a temple on a hill above the town. They built it, and Demeter sat inside it, alone, and refused to let anything grow. Without Demeter's blessing, nothing grew. The crops failed. The grain withered in the fields. The earth became barren and hard. People began to starve. The oxen pulled their plows through dry, cracked soil, and nothing came up. Seeds sat in the ground and rotted. Fruit fell from the trees before it was ripe. Even the grass turned brown. This wasn't just a bad season. This was the end of agriculture. The end of bread, of beer, of everything that civilization was built on. Zeus realized that if this continued, all of humanity would die, and there would be no one left to worship the gods or make sacrifices. The gods needed humans almost as much as humans needed the gods. Without worship, without offerings, the gods would be forgotten, and a forgotten god is a diminished god. Zeus sent one god after another to persuade Demeter to return. Iris came with her rainbow scarf and offered gifts. Demeter refused. Each of the Olympians came in turn. Demeter refused them all. She wanted her daughter back. Nothing else mattered, not the world, not the gods, not the slow death of every living thing. Finally, Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger, down to the underworld with an order for Hades to release Persephone. Hades agreed, but before Persephone left, he offered her food. Pomegranate seeds, just a few. Some versions say 4, some say 6. Persephone ate them. This matters because of a rule in Greek mythology. Anyone who eats the food of the dead is bound to the underworld forever. Persephone had tasted the pomegranate, and she could not be entirely free. A compromise was made. Zeus decreed that Persephone would spend part of each year in the underworld with Hades, and part of each year above ground with her mother. The exact division varies. Some sources say 4 months below and 8 above. Others say 6 and 6. It depends on whether you're reading Hesiod or Homer or someone else entirely. When Persephone returns to the surface each year, Demeter's joy makes the earth bloom. Flowers open, grass grows, the wheat rises in the fields. Spring comes. When Persephone descends back to the underworld, Demeter grieves, and the earth grows cold and bare. Autumn comes, then winter. That's why the seasons change. At least, that's what the Greeks said. There's something I find beautiful about this story. It's not about punishment. It's not about hubris or defiance. It's about a mother who loved her child so much that she was willing to let the entire world starve until she got her back. And she didn't get everything she wanted. She got a compromise. Part of the year, her daughter is with her. Part of the year, her daughter is gone. And every year, Demeter has to let go again. And every year, she has to wait. That feels true to me. That feels like something real about the way the world works. The fields outside the window are dark and still. We've been traveling for a while now. The reading lamp in the cabin has been dimmed, just a glow in the corner, warm and orange. The train is heading through a wide valley. I can see the outline of low mountains on both sides, black against a sky that's full of stars. The story of Persephone was at the heart of the most important religious ceremony in ancient Greece, the Eleusinian Mysteries. They were held every year at Eleusis, in the sanctuary that Demeter had commanded the people to build. For over 1,000 years, from roughly 1600 BCE to 392 CE, people came from all over the Greek world to be initiated into these rites. The requirement for entry was simple. You had to speak Greek. You couldn't have committed murder. Men, women, and even slaves were allowed. The only other requirement was that you swore a vow of secrecy about what happened during the ceremony. And remarkably, for over 1,000 years, almost nobody broke that vow. We still don't know exactly what the initiates experienced. This is one of the great silences of the ancient world. Thousands upon thousands of people underwent the same ritual, and almost none of them wrote down what they saw. A few hints survived. The Christian writer Clement of Alexandria, writing in the 2nd century CE with the intention of discrediting pagan rituals, let slip some details. He mentioned sacred objects that were revealed to the initiates, things that were taken from a chest and handled, then put back. He mentioned a search in the dark and then a sudden burst of light. But Clement was hostile to the rites, and scholars debate how much of what he reported was accurate. We know some things. The lesser mysteries were held in February in Athens as a kind of preparation. Initiates fasted and made sacrifices. They purified themselves by bathing in the river Ilissos. The greater mysteries were held in September or October at Eleusis. The ceremony lasted about 9 days, matching the 9 days Demeter spent searching for Persephone. There was a procession from Athens to Eleusis, 22 kilometers, along a road called the Sacred Way. It was the only paved road in central Greece. The procession carried sacred objects in closed baskets, and the initiates walked barefoot, wearing wreaths of myrtle. Along the sacred way, at a narrow bridge, masked figures stood and shouted obscenities at the passing pilgrims. This was a formal part of the ritual, called the Gepharismos. Scholars think it echoed a moment in the myth when an old woman named Iambe told rude jokes to Demeter and made her smile for the first time since losing Persephone. Even in their most solemn ceremonies, the Greeks found room for laughter. At Eleusis, the initiates fasted for 3 days. They bathed in the sea. They sacrificed piglets, which they washed in the salt water first. They drank a ritual beverage called kykeon, made from barley and water and pennyroyal mint. Some modern scholars have speculated that the kykeon may have contained a psychoactive substance, perhaps ergot, a fungus that grows on grain and contains alkaloids related to LSD. The theory was proposed by scholars Gordon Wasson, Albert Hoffman, and Carl Ruck in a 1978 book called The Road to Eleusis. There is no consensus. The archaeological evidence is inconclusive. But many ancient writers reported that the experience inside the telesterion, the great hall of initiation, was overwhelming and transformative. The telesterion itself was enormous, could hold about 3,000 people at once. The remains at Eleusis show a building roughly 50 meters square, supported by 42 columns, with stepped seating carved from the bedrock of the hill. At its center was a small stone chamber called the Anakteron, where the high priest stood. Only the chief priest, the Hierophant, was allowed to enter the Anakteron. His title means the one who shows sacred things. The Hierophant held the office for life and was chosen from a single family, the Eumolpidae, who traced their lineage back to the mythological first priest of the mysteries. The playwright Sophocles, who was an initiate, wrote that those who had seen the mysteries were blessed in the afterlife. Cicero, the Roman orator, wrote in the 1st century BCE that the mysteries taught people how to live with virtue and how to die with hope. Whatever happened in that hall, it changed people. It removed their fear of death. In 392 CE, the Roman Emperor Theodosius banned all non-Christian religious practices across the empire. The mysteries ended, and in 396 CE, the Visigoth king Alaric invaded Greece and destroyed the sanctuary at Eleusis. The sacred objects were scattered. The sacred knowledge was lost. But Demeter's story survived. The myth outlived the mystery. The train has crossed into Boeotia now, I think. This is the land where Hesiod lived, that unhappy farmer who wrote down the first versions of these stories. Somewhere nearby, in the dark, is the site of ancient Thebes, where Oedipus ruled and where Dionysus was born. The soil here is rich and flat, good farming land, Demeter's country. Someone in the next cabin coughs softly. Then it's quiet again. Let me tell you now about Crete and a labyrinth and a monster that lived at its center. King Minos of Crete was powerful. He ruled the seas with a fleet that had no equal. But he had a problem. His wife, Pasiphae, had offended the god Poseidon, and as punishment, Poseidon caused her to fall in love with a sacred white bull. The result of this curse was a child born with the body of a man and the head and tail of a bull. They called him the Minotaur. Minos needed to hide this creature, to contain it, to keep it out of sight. So he summoned the most brilliant craftsman in the world, a man named Daedalus. Daedalus was Athenian. He had fled Athens under a cloud. His nephew, a boy named Perdix, or Talos, depending on which source you read, had been his apprentice. The boy was astonishingly talented. He invented the saw after finding a fish spine on the beach and noticing its serrated edge. He invented the compass. Daedalus, consumed with jealousy, threw the boy from the top of the Acropolis. Athena saved the child by turning him into a partridge. Daedalus was tried for the murder attempt and banished. He came to Crete, to the court of Minos, and there he found work as an architect. He married a woman named Naukrite, and they had a son, Icarus. When Minos asked Daedalus to build an enclosure for the Minotaur, Daedalus designed the Labyrinth. It was so complex, so full of branching paths and dead ends and turning corridors, that anyone who entered it could never find their way out. The Minotaur was placed inside. There may be a grain of truth in this. The Palace of Knossos, which was excavated beginning in 1900 by the British archaeologist Arthur Evans, is an enormous structure. Evans spent 35 years and most of his fortune uncovering it. The palace covers about 14,000 square meters. It has roughly 1,300 rooms, arranged in a complex, winding layout around a central courtyard. There are corridors that double back on themselves. There are staircases that lead to dead ends. There are rooms within rooms within rooms. Evans himself suggested that the palace's maze-like plan might have inspired the myth of the labyrinth. The Minoans, who built Knossos between 2000 and 1400 BCE, were fond of the double axe as a symbol. The Greek word for double axe is labrys. Labyrinth may simply mean the house of the double axe. The palace had indoor plumbing. It had flushing toilets and a drainage system made of interlocking clay pipes. It had light wells that brought sunlight into interior rooms. It had frescoes on the walls, showing dolphins and young people leaping over bulls. The bull leaping frescoes are startling. They show athletes, both male and female, grabbing the horns of a charging bull and somersaulting over its back. Whether this was a real practice or a symbolic one, scholars still argue. But the image of young Athenians sent into a structure to face a bull creature doesn't seem so far from what those frescoes depict. Evans's reconstructions at Knossos are controversial among archaeologists. He rebuilt columns and walls and painted them in bright colors based partly on evidence and partly on his own imagination. Some of what you see at Knossos today is Minoan. Some of it is early 20th century British concrete. It's hard to know where one ends and the other begins. But the scale of the place is real. Standing in the central courtyard, surrounded by levels and corridors in every direction, you can understand why someone would look at this and think, labyrinth. Here's the thing about the labyrinth. When Sir Arthur Evans, a British archaeologist, began excavating at Knossos on Crete in 1900, he uncovered a vast palace. It had about 1,300 rooms. It had multi-story buildings, grand staircases, light wells, plumbing, and elaborate frescoes on the walls, many of them showing young people leaping over bulls. Evans looked at this enormous, bewildering complex of rooms and corridors and said, "This is the labyrinth. The mythical maze and the real palace might be the same place." The Minoan civilization that built Knossos was one of the earliest in Europe. It flourished from about 3000 to 1100 BCE. They had running water. They had flush toilets. They had a writing system that we still can't fully read, called Linear A. They were sophisticated, artistic, and then they were gone. The palaces were destroyed, possibly by earthquake, possibly by invasion, possibly by the eruption of the volcano at Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE, which was one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history. The myths might be echoes of that real world, distorted by centuries of retelling. Now, Minos had a problem with Athens. His son, Androgeos, had traveled to Athens and competed in the Panathenaic Games, the great athletic festival held every 4 years in honor of Athena. He won every event he entered. He was strong and graceful and impossible to beat. But he died in Athens. Some say he was killed in the games. Some say Aegeus, the king of Athens, sent him to fight the Marathonian bull, a savage creature that was terrorizing the countryside northeast of the city, and the bull killed him. Some say it was a political murder. The details vary, but the grief was the same. Minos lost his son in a foreign city, and he wanted someone to pay. Minos, furious with grief, sailed against Athens with his Cretan fleet. The war went badly for the Athenians. They had no navy to match the Cretans, who controlled the sea lanes of the eastern Mediterranean. Athens surrendered. As the price of peace, Minos demanded a tribute. Every 9 years, Athens had to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete. They were placed in the labyrinth, and the Minotaur devoured them. This went on for years. 3 times the tribute was paid, and 42 young Athenians were lost in the dark corridors of the maze. Families drew lots to decide whose children would go. The ship sailed with black sails, like a funeral procession over water. The Athenians remembered this as a time of helplessness and shame. Their city, which would one day produce Socrates and Plato and democracy and the Parthenon, was a subject state, paying its debt in human lives to a king on a faraway island. Then Theseus volunteered. Theseus was the prince of Athens, the son of King Aegeus. He was brave and reckless and confident that he could kill the Minotaur and end the suffering of his city. His father begged him not to go. Theseus went anyway. But he made his father a promise. The ship would sail to Crete with black sails, as was the custom for such a grim voyage. If Theseus survived and was coming home victorious, he would raise white sails. If the sails stayed black, Aegeus would know his son was dead. When Theseus arrived in Crete, something unexpected happened. Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, saw him and fell in love. She went to Daedalus, who had designed the labyrinth, and asked how it could be navigated. Daedalus told her the secret. Take a ball of thread, tie one end to the entrance, unwind it as you go, then follow it back. Ariadne gave Theseus the thread and a sword. He tied the thread to the doorpost and entered the labyrinth. He followed the corridors, always forward, always down, never left or right. That was Daedalus's instruction, relayed through Ariadne. And at the heart of the maze, in the deepest part, he found the Minotaur. The beast was sleeping. It woke. There was a fight. In some versions, Theseus used the sword. In others, he used his bare hands. He strangled the Minotaur. He cut off its head. And then he turned around, picked up the thread, and followed it back through the twisting corridors, through the dead ends and false turns, all the way to the entrance, where Ariadne was waiting. They fled. Theseus, Ariadne, the other Athenian youths. They got on their ship and sailed. They stopped on the island of Naxos. What happened there depends on which version you read. In some stories, Theseus abandoned Ariadne while she slept. In others, the god Dionysus appeared in a dream and told Theseus that Ariadne was fated to be his bride, not Theseus's, and threatened dire consequences if the hero didn't leave her. In either case, Theseus sailed away without Ariadne. Dionysus found her on the beach, heartbroken and alone, and married her. He lifted her into the sky and turned her wedding crown into a constellation. You can still see it on clear nights. Corona Borealis, the northern crown. But Theseus, in his haste, in his grief over leaving Ariadne, in the confusion of everything that had happened, forgot to change the sails. His father, King Aegeus, was standing on a cliff at Cape Sunion on the southernmost tip of Attica, watching the horizon for the returning ship. He saw the black sails. He thought his son was dead. And in his despair, he threw himself off the cliff into the sea. The sea was named after him, the Aegean. Every time you see that word on a map, you're reading the name of a grieving father. Cape Sunion is a real place. You can visit it. It's about 70 kilometers south of Athens, a rocky promontory that juts out into the water at the southernmost point of the Attic Peninsula. On its summit stand the ruins of the Temple of Poseidon, built around 444 BCE, about the same time as the Parthenon. 15 of the original 34 columns are still standing. They're made of white marble from the quarries at Agrelasa, a few kilometers inland. The marble has a high iron content, which means it has weathered to a pale gray gold over the centuries, instead of turning the dingy brown that most ancient marble becomes. The view from Sunion is one of the most famous in Greece. You can see the islands of the Cyclades stretched across the water in a rough arc. On clear days, you can count them: Chaia, Kythnos, Seriphos, Makronissos, which is little more than a bare rock. The light at sunset is extraordinary. The temple turns gold, and then pink, and then purple, as the sun goes down behind the mountains of the Peloponnese. Sailors passing the cape would have seen the temple shining above them and known that they were almost home to Athens. Lord Byron visited Sunion in 1810 during his first trip to Greece. He carved his name on one of the temple's columns. You can still see it there, scratched into the marble. Byron. He later wrote a poem about the place, about the sunset and the sea and the silence, but the graffiti is what people remember. The most famous poet in the English language and his lasting contribution to Sunion was vandalism. The Greeks are used to this sort of thing from their visitors. After Aegeus died, Theseus became king of Athens. The myths credit him with unifying the scattered villages and towns of Attica into a single city-state. This event, called the Sinoikismos, may reflect a real historical process that took place over centuries, condensed by the myth-makers into a single hero's accomplishment. The Athenians celebrated a festival called the Synoikia every year in Theseus's honor, on the 16th day of the month Hekatombaion, which falls roughly in July. Theseus had many other adventures after Crete. He fought the Amazons. He descended to the underworld with his friend Persephone in a doomed attempt to kidnap Persephone. He lost his kingdom. He died in exile on the island of Skyros, pushed off a cliff by his host, King Lycomedes. Another fall from a high place. The myths are full of these echoes. The sea was named after him, the Aegean. The ruins of a temple to Poseidon still stand on that cliff at Sunion. Some of the marble columns are visible from the sea. Lord Byron carved his name into one of them in 1810, which is the kind of thing Lord Byron did. But the temple itself is from the 5th century BCE, and it would have been there, gleaming white against the blue, when ships sailed past, carrying young men and women to their deaths in the labyrinth. The train sways a little as we round a curve. Outside the window, the landscape has changed. More hills now, darker. The trees are closer to the track. Pine trees, I think. Their shapes like dark pyramids against the sky. You don't need to follow every word. The train will carry us either way. After Theseus escaped, King Minos discovered that Daedalus had helped him, that it was Daedalus who had told Ariadne the secret of the labyrinth. Minos was enraged. He imprisoned Daedalus and his young son Icarus in a high tower overlooking the sea. Some versions say he imprisoned them in the labyrinth itself. Either way, they were trapped. Minos controlled every ship that left the island. He had his soldiers search every vessel. There was no way out by sea. But Daedalus watched the birds circling the tower. He studied the way they held their wings, the way they tilted into the wind, the way they rode the currents of air without effort. And he had an idea. He gathered feathers, every feather he could find lying on the ground, blown in by the wind, dropped by the seabirds that nested on the cliffs. He arranged them in rows, from smallest to largest, mimicking the shape of a bird's wing. He bound them together with thread and sandal straps and beeswax. He made 2 pairs of wings, one for himself, one for Icarus. Before they launched themselves from the tower, Daedalus gave his son a warning. 2 warnings, actually. Don't fly too close to the sea, because the spray will soak the feathers and weigh them down. And don't fly too close to the sun, because the heat will melt the beeswax that holds the feathers together. Fly between the extremes. That's what Daedalus told his son. The middle way. Not too high, not too low. They jumped. They flew. They actually flew. Father and son rising above the tower, above the palace, above the cliffs of Crete, out over the open sea. Below them, the water was dark blue, almost purple. Fishermen on boats looked up and thought they were seeing gods. Icarus was young. He forgot. Or maybe he didn't forget. Maybe he knew exactly what he was doing. The feeling of flight, the freedom, the wind in his face, the world shrinking beneath him. He climbed higher. The air thinned. The sun grew warmer. The wax began to soften. The feathers began to loosen. And then, one by one, they came apart. Icarus fell. He called out to his father. By the time Daedalus turned around, there was nothing but feathers floating on the water. Daedalus circled. He searched. He found his son's body washed up on the shore of a small island. He buried Icarus there. He named the island Icaria. The sea around it is still called the Icarian Sea. You can visit it today. It's in the eastern Aegean, not far from the coast of Turkey. People live there. They grow grapes and keep bees. They have one of the longest life expectancies in the world, which is an interesting thing for a place named after a boy who died too young. Researchers have studied the island's population, trying to figure out what makes them live so long. Slow pace of life, they say. Strong community ties. Good olive oil. Afternoon naps. A kind of contentment with small things. The archaeologists have never found Icarus's grave, of course. It's a myth. But on Icaria, you can find a rocky headland called Dracano, where an ancient tower still stands. And if you sit there in the evening and watch the sun go down over the Aegean, with the sea turning gold and then bronze and then dark blue, you can almost believe that a boy with wax wings fell into that water a very long time ago, and that the island remembers. Daedalus flew on alone to Sicily. He never built another pair of wings. The story of Icarus is usually told as a warning about arrogance. Fly too close to the sun and you'll fall. But I've always thought there's something else in it too. Daedalus also warned Icarus not to fly too low, not to play it too safe, not to skim the surface of the water out of fear. The lesson isn't just don't reach too high. It's also don't stay too low. The path is in the middle. The hard part is finding it. The train has settled into a deep, steady rhythm now. We must be on a long, straight run through one of the Thessalian plains. The engine's hum is lower. The vibration through the floor is soft and constant, like a pulse. The reading lamp has flickered once, then steadied. I'm going to tell you one more story tonight, maybe the saddest one. It's about a musician, the greatest musician who ever lived, according to the Greeks. His name was Orpheus. Orpheus was from Thrace, the wild, forested country in the northeast of Greece. His father was said to be Oagris, the king of Thrace, though some versions say his father was Apollo, the god of music. His mother was Calliope, the muse of epic poetry. Apollo gave Orpheus a golden lyre and taught him to play. And Orpheus played so beautifully that nothing could resist his music. Not animals, not humans, not enemies. The trees bent toward him when he played. The rivers changed their courses to be closer to his song. Stones rolled toward him. Even the birds fell silent to listen. He sailed with Jason and the Argonauts on their quest for the Golden Fleece. When the ship passed the island of the Sirens, those creatures whose song lured sailors to their deaths, it was Orpheus who saved the crew. He played his lyre louder and more beautifully than the sirens could sing, drowning them out. The Argonauts sailed past safely. Then Orpheus met Eurydice. She was a nymph, or perhaps just a young woman, of extraordinary beauty and grace. They fell in love. They married. But the earliest account of their story, from the Greek poet Ibycus, around 530 BCE, tells us that their happiness was brief. On their wedding day, or perhaps very shortly after, Eurydice was walking in a meadow with her friends. She stepped on a snake. The venom killed her quickly. She was gone. Orpheus was destroyed by grief. He wandered the earth playing mournful songs on his lyre. He ate nothing. He spoke to no one. Everything in the world seemed hollow without Eurydice. And then he made a decision that no mortal had ever made before. He decided to go to the underworld and bring her back. He found the entrance at Taenarum, in the southernmost part of the Peloponnese, a cave that the Greeks said led down to the realm of Hades. He walked down into the dark. He played his lyre. The music charmed Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guarded the gates of the underworld. The beast lay down and let Orpheus pass. The music stopped the dead in their tracks. Ghosts gathered around him, listening. Tantalus, who was condemned to stand in a pool of water that receded every time he tried to drink, forgot his thirst. Sisyphus, who was condemned to push a boulder up a hill only to have it roll back down forever, sat down on his stone and listened. The wheel of Ixion, which never stopped turning, stopped. The Furies wept. According to the Roman poet Ovid, writing in his Metamorphoses, it was the first time the Furies had ever cried. Orpheus reached the throne of Hades and Persephone. He played for them. He sang about his love for Eurydice. He sang about how short life is, how all things come to the underworld eventually, how he was not asking for a gift, but only for a loan. He would bring Eurydice back to the light, and when their natural lives were over, they would both return to the realm of the dead. All he asked for was time. A few years. A normal human span. Hades wept. Persephone wept. Even the cold king of the dead could not refuse this plea. They agreed. Eurydice could leave. But there was one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead of her, up through the dark tunnels that led back to the surface. Eurydice would follow behind him. He must not look back at her. Not once. Not until they had both crossed the threshold into the light of the sun. If he looked back while she was still in the darkness, she would be lost to him forever. Orpheus agreed. He turned and began the long walk up. This is the part of the story that has haunted people for thousands of years. Try to imagine it. You're walking through absolute darkness. Behind you, somewhere, is the person you love more than anything in the world. You can't see her. You can't touch her. In some versions of the story, Orpheus can't even hear her footsteps. The dead don't walk the way the living do. He has nothing but faith. The path is steep, it's long. The air gets warmer as they climb. Orpheus can feel the light ahead of him. He can sense the opening, the way the air moves differently near the surface. His heart is beating faster. He's almost there. He steps into the sunlight, and he turns. Eurydice is still in the shadow. She has not yet crossed the threshold. She is one step, maybe two, behind him. He sees her face just for a moment. Some say she reached out her arms toward him. Some say she whispered, "Farewell." And then the darkness pulled her back, like a wave retreating from the shore. She was gone. Orpheus tried to follow. He ran back to the entrance of the underworld, but the way was sealed. Charon, the boatman who ferries souls across the river Styx, refused to carry him. Hermes barred the gate. No mortal enters the realm of the dead twice. Orpheus sat on the bank of the river Styx for 7 days. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He became, according to Ovid, little more than a skeleton held together by grief. After that, the stories diverge. Most agree that Orpheus wandered for a long time, playing sad songs. He refused the company of all women. The Maenads, the wild female followers of Dionysus, were offended by his rejection. In their frenzy, they tore him apart. But here is the strange and beautiful ending. Orpheus's head, still singing, floated down the river Hebrus to the sea, and then across the water to the island of Lesbos. His lyre drifted up to the heavens and became a constellation. The lyre, Lyra. If you look at the summer sky in Greece, you can find it. A small diamond of stars with one bright one at its center. Vega. One of the brightest stars visible from Earth, about 25 light-years away. Orpheus's soul went down to the underworld at last, and there, the myths say, he found Eurydice. They walk together in the fields of Elysium, the blessed realm of the dead. And now, when Orpheus turns to look at her, she is still there. The train is very quiet now. We've been traveling for a long time. The rhythms have become part of the air, part of the silence. Click-clack, click-clack. Like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to anyone in particular. Just the train, doing what trains do, moving forward. If you've already drifted off, that's fine. I'll keep going, just in case. There are a few more things I want to tell you before the night is done. Smaller things, quieter things. The kind of stories that belong to the late hours when the train is steady and the world outside is very dark. The Greeks spent a lot of time thinking about the underworld, not just because of Persephone and Orpheus. They had a whole geography of death mapped out as carefully as they mapped the coastlines of the Aegean. The dead arrived first at the river Styx. It was a real river, or at least the Greeks said it was. There's a waterfall in Arcadia, in the Peloponnese, called the Mavroneri, the Black Water, that the ancients identified as the Styx. The water comes down a cliff face about 200 meters tall, near the village of Nonacris. Pausanias, the Greek travel writer, visited it in the 2nd century CE and reported that the water was deadly to animals and corroded metal. Modern analysis has found the water has a very high mineral content, not deadly, but unusual enough that you can see why people told stories about it. The boatman Charon waited at the river. He was old. He was grumpy. He ferried souls across to the realm of Hades, but only if they had a coin to pay the fare. This is why the Greeks placed a small coin, usually an obol, in the mouths of the dead before burial. An obol was worth about 1/6 of a drachma, enough to buy a small loaf of bread. That was the price of passage to eternity. If you didn't have a coin, you waited on the bank. Some souls waited for 100 years. Patience, apparently, was required even after death. On the other side of the river, there were different realms for different kinds of souls. The asphodel meadows were where most people went. It was neither good nor bad. It was simply dim and gray and quiet. The souls there had no memories of their former lives. They drifted like smoke, without desire or sorrow. Homer described them as chittering like bats in a cave. It wasn't a punishment. It was just nothing. An eternity of not very much. Tartarus was the deep prison far below even the underworld. That's where the truly wicked were sent, and where the Titans were chained after the war. The distance from the underworld to Tartarus, Hesiod wrote, was the same as the distance from the earth to the sky. If you dropped an anvil from the surface of the earth, it would fall for 9 days before hitting the bottom of Tartarus. That's a long drop. And then there was Elysium, the blessed fields, the Greek paradise. It was reserved for heroes, for the virtuous, for those who had been initiated into the mysteries. Homer placed it at the edge of the world, by the banks of the river Oceanus, where the west wind always blows and the weather is always mild. Pindar, the poet, described it as a place where golden flowers bloomed, and the blessed spent their time in music and games and horse riding. Later versions added the Isles of the Blessed, which were even better than Elysium. Only those who had been reincarnated 3 times and chosen Elysium each time were allowed to go there. It was the ultimate reward. Eternal peace, in a place where the sun shone even when it was dark everywhere else. The Greeks also told stories about people who were punished forever. You've already heard about Prometheus and his eagle, but there were others. Sisyphus was a king of Corinth. He was clever and devious. When Thanatos, the personification of death, came for him, Sisyphus tricked him. He asked Thanatos to demonstrate how the chains worked, and when Thanatos put them on himself, Sisyphus locked them shut. For a while, nobody in the world could die. Ares, the god of war, was furious because his battles had lost their stakes. He freed Thanatos, and Sisyphus was dragged to the underworld. But Sisyphus had told his wife not to perform the burial rites. When he arrived in the underworld, he complained to Persephone that his wife had been disrespectful by not burying him properly. He asked for permission to go back to the surface to scold her. Persephone agreed. Sisyphus went back to the world of the living and refused to return. The gods finally caught up with him. Hermes dragged him back to the underworld for good. His punishment was simple and terrible. He was given a boulder and told to push it to the top of a hill. Every time he reached the summit, the boulder rolled back down. He had to start again, and again, and again. Forever. The French writer Albert Camus wrote an essay about Sisyphus in 1942. He said we must imagine Sisyphus happy, that the struggle itself, the act of pushing, was enough to fill a man's heart. I'm not sure the ancient Greeks would have agreed, but it's a nice thought. Tantalus was a king who had been invited to dine with the gods. He was honored beyond any mortal, but he abused this privilege. In one version, he stole ambrosia and nectar and gave them to his mortal friends. In another, far darker version, he killed his own son, Pelops, and served him as a feast to the gods, to test whether they could tell the difference between mortal flesh and animal meat. The gods could tell. They were disgusted. Demeter, distracted by grief for Persephone, accidentally ate a piece of Pelops's shoulder. The gods restored the boy to life and gave him a new shoulder made of ivory. Tantalus was cast into the underworld and placed in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree. When he bent to drink, the water receded. When he reached for the fruit, the branches lifted away. He was eternally hungry and thirsty, surrounded by food and drink he could never touch. Our word tantalize comes from his name. The train passes through another small town. A few lights in windows. A church steeple, white against the dark sky. A dog barking somewhere far off. Then the fields again. The endless Greek fields. There's another story I think about on nights like this. The story of Echo and Narcissus. It's a small one, quiet, but it stays with you. Echo was a nymph who loved to talk. She was clever with words and could keep a conversation going forever. Hera, suspecting that Zeus's various nymph companions were hiding from her, asked Echo what was going on. Echo distracted Hera with long, winding, entertaining stories, while the other nymphs escaped. When Hera realized what had happened, she cursed Echo. From that day on, Echo could never speak first. She could only repeat the last words spoken to her. After the curse, Echo saw a young man in the forest. His name was Narcissus, and he was the most beautiful person she had ever seen. He was the son of the river god Sisyphus and the nymph Liriope. A prophet named Tiresias had predicted that Narcissus would live a long life, but only if he never saw his own reflection. Echo followed Narcissus through the woods, unable to speak, only able to repeat what he said. When he called out, "Is anyone here?" she answered, "Here." When he said, "Come to me," she said, "Come to me," and rushed toward him with open arms. But Narcissus pulled away. He wanted nothing to do with her. Echo retreated into the forest. She pined and grieved until her body wasted away. All that remained was her voice, repeating the words of others. In rocky valleys and mountain passes, you can still hear her, they said. The last word of every shout coming back to you from the stones. Narcissus, meanwhile, continued to reject everyone who loved him. One day, he stopped at a pool to drink and saw his own reflection in the still water. Fell in love with it. He couldn't look away. He reached for the beautiful face in the water, but every time his fingers touched the surface, the image shattered. He lay by the pool, gazing at himself, until he died. In the place where he had lain, a flower grew, white petals surrounding a golden center, the Narcissus. Ovid tells this story in his Metamorphoses. He wrote it around 8 CE in Rome. The Greek versions are older but fragmentary. What survived, through Ovid, is a story about the danger of looking inward for too long, about missing the love that's right in front of you because you're too busy staring at yourself. The train sways. The glass of the window is cool if you press your fingers to it. You can feel the night out there, vast and quiet. The stars don't care about any of these stories. They were burning long before the Greeks gave them names. And they'll be burning long after every myth is forgotten. But there's something comforting about the fact that people tried to make sense of them, that they looked up at random patterns of light and saw heroes and gods and monsters and love stories. Speaking of stars, the Greeks were careful astronomers, even if they wrapped their observations in myth. Eratosthenes, who lived in Alexandria around 240 BCE, measured the circumference of the Earth using shadows and geometry, and got it right to within about 2%. He calculated roughly 40,000 kilometers. The actual figure is 40,075 kilometers. He did this with a stick, a well, and basic math. No telescopes, no satellites, just a very good mind. Hipparchus, working on the island of Rhodes around 130 BCE, catalogued 850 stars by brightness and position. His catalogue was the most accurate star map in the ancient world. He also discovered the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that takes about 26,000 years to complete a full cycle. He noticed that certain stars had shifted positions slightly from where Babylonian astronomers had recorded them centuries earlier. From that tiny discrepancy, he deduced one of the fundamental motions of the planet. The Greeks named 48 constellations. Most of them are still in use today. Ptolemy listed them in his Almagest around 150 CE, and they form the core of the 88 constellations recognized by modern astronomy. When you look up at Orion, or Cassiopeia, or Lyra, you are using a map that Greek shepherds and sailors drew with their imaginations over 2,000 years ago. Orion was a giant hunter who boasted that he could kill every animal on Earth. The Earth goddess Gaia sent a scorpion to stop him. It stung his heel and killed him. Zeus placed Orion in the sky, but he also placed the scorpion there, on the opposite side, so that when Scorpius rises in the east, Orion sets in the west. They chase each other around the sky forever, never meeting. Even among the stars, the Greeks put their stories about conflict and consequence. The Pleiades are a cluster of stars in the constellation Taurus. The Greeks said they were 7 sisters, daughters of the Titan Atlas and the sea nymph Pleione. When Orion pursued them, Zeus turned them into stars to protect them. Only 6 are visible to the naked eye. The 7th, Merope, hid her light out of shame because she was the only sister who married a mortal. At least, that's what the poet said. Astronomers say the 7th star is simply fainter. Outside the window, there's nothing but dark hills and sky. The moon has set or gone behind clouds. The stars are everywhere. The Greeks saw stories in those patterns. Orion and his dogs hunting across the winter sky. Perseus still holding the head of Medusa. Andromeda chained to her rock. Cassiopeia, vain and beautiful, sitting in her chair. The lyre of Orpheus, with bright Vega at its center. The ancient Greeks looked up at those patterns and saw themselves, their fears, their hopes, their loves, their losses. They turned them into stories and passed those stories down for 100 generations. And somehow, the stories are still here, still being told on a train moving through the Greek night. I think about that sometimes, how a farmer in a bad town in Boeotia 3,000 years ago sat down and wrote about how the world began, and we're still reading his words. Hesiod couldn't have imagined a train. He couldn't have imagined a world where his stories would be heard in languages he'd never heard of, in countries he didn't know existed. But the stories outlived everything. The temples fell. The cities crumbled. The civilization that created them rose and peaked and fell. And the stories just kept going. The Parthenon lost its roof in 1687 when a Venetian cannonball hit the gunpowder the Ottomans were storing inside. The temple of Zeus at Olympia was toppled by an earthquake in the 6th century CE. The Colossus of Rhodes, that enormous bronze statue of Helios that stood at the harbor entrance, fell in an earthquake in 226 BCE and lay on the ground for 800 years before it was finally broken up and sold for scrap. The physical things the Greeks built were not permanent. Stone cracks, bronze melts, marble erodes. But the stories are still here. Persephone still descends every autumn. Orpheus still turns around too soon. Icarus still flies too close to the sun. Sisyphus still pushes his boulder. The myths have been translated into every living language. They've been retold in novels and operas and films and comic books and bedtime stories told on trains moving through the dark. There's something reassuring about that, I think. The things we make with words are durable. They last longer than stone. We're still moving. The wheels are still turning. There's one more thing I want to mention, and then I'll let the train do the rest. The ancient Greeks had a word, nostos. It means homecoming, the return home after a long journey. The Odyssey, Homer's great epic, is a nostos. It's the story of Odysseus trying to get home to Ithaca after the Trojan War. It takes him 10 years. He faces monsters and gods and storms and temptation. But the pull of home is stronger than all of it. Our word, nostalgia, comes from nostos. It literally means the pain of homecoming, the ache for a place you've left behind, or maybe a place you're trying to reach. I think trains understand nostos. Every train is going somewhere. Every train has a destination. The journey might be long and dark and full of stops you didn't plan on, but the track always leads somewhere. The wheels always turn. The Eleusinian mysteries promised the initiates that death was not the end, that there was a return. Persephone went down into the dark every year, and every year she came back. The grain was buried in the earth, and every year it rose again. The pattern held. Winter always gave way to spring. And Orpheus, for all his grief, for all his loss, found Eurydice again at the end. After everything, after the snake and the darkness, and the one terrible moment when he turned too soon, he found her. The train passes through a small tunnel cut into a hillside. The sound changes. The air pressure shifts. For a few seconds, the world is nothing but rumble and dark. Then we're through, and the window opens up again to the night sky and the distant hills and the stars. We're in Thessaly now, the land of the centaurs, the half-men, half-horses who roamed these plains in the old stories. The land where the hero Achilles was born, in a palace by the sea. The land where Jason gathered his crew of Argonauts, including Orpheus, and sailed east to find the Golden Fleece. Somewhere ahead of us, in the dark, Mount Olympus is standing. We can't see it. We won't see it until dawn, if then. The clouds may hide it. The gods may be sleeping. But it's there. It's always there. The highest point in this ancient, story-filled land. The place where the Greeks said the gods lived above the weather, in the pure light, looking down at the world they'd made. I wonder what they thought about, those gods, sitting on their thrones of cloud. I wonder if they told stories too, about the mortals, about the strange, brief, beautiful creatures who lived and loved and died in the valleys below. The train rocks gently. The wheels keep their rhythm. The cabin is warm and dark and still. If this helped you rest tonight, maybe you'd like to ride with us again sometime. There are a lot more stories out there, a lot more tracks to follow, a lot more miles of dark countryside rolling past the window. But for now, the train is steady, the night is quiet. The gods are sleeping, and the heroes are at rest. and the old stories have settled into the ground like seeds, waiting for spring. The wheels turn, the track goes on, the dark countryside rolls past the window, and the stars keep their slow circuits overhead. And somewhere, far ahead of us, there's a city by the sea, where the morning light will fall on white. Buildings and blue water and the ordinary business of people going about their lives, carrying 3,000 years of stories in their blood without even knowing it. But that's for tomorrow. Right now, there's just the train, the rhythm, the warmth of this small cabin, the sound of the wheels on the track, steady and sure, going on and on and on. Good night.